My name is Nelson Arolilala Mandela. I spent 27 years in prison fighting for equality. And I walked out not to revenge, but to build a new democratic nation where all people are free. Each day was a lesson for me. You know the hope. Now listen to my story.
He was born into a land steeped in struggle, in a village where the sun painted the earth red and the horizon seemed endless. On July 18, 1918, in the rural village of Mvezo in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, a boy was given the name Rolihlahla Mandela, troublemaker, as tradition would later confirm. From the outset, his life seemed poised between ordinary existence and extraordinary destiny. Mandela's ancestry linked him to the Tembu royal line, a heritage that carried both honor and expectation. His father, Godla Henry Mpakaniezwa, was a local chief and counselor, a man respected for wisdom and leadership, yet fallen from favor with colonial authorities. Mandela's mother, Nosekeni Fanny, was gentle, deeply spiritual, and a source of grounding amidst the turbulence of life in a land torn by racial hierarchy and colonial rule. The boy grew in the shadow of both tradition and colonial intrusion. In the rolling hills and dense forests of the Transkei, he learned to navigate the rhythms of nature, to listen to the stories of elders, and to understand the subtle codes of community and respect. Yet he also witnessed injustice early. European settlers and government officials imposed laws, taxes, and restrictions on Black communities, carving the landscape into a hierarchy that marginalized those whose ancestors had tilled the land for centuries. From the outset, Mandela's consciousness was shaped by contrasts: authority and subjugation, pride and oppression, dignity and systemic violence. Education became Mandela's early avenue of empowerment. Unlike many of his peers, he was sent to mission schools, institutions where literacy, mathematics, and European history were taught alongside Christian teachings. At the Clarkbury Boarding Institute, and later at Healdtown, Mandela's aptitude for learning became evident. He excelled in oratory and debate, displaying an ability to weave words into persuasion and inspiration, a skill that would define his public life. The schools also exposed him to stories of liberation, equality, and justice, though often framed within the limited perspectives of colonial curricula. Yet Mandela absorbed lessons with discernment, combining the moral frameworks of his community with the knowledge of the wider world. Mandela's early life was also marked by personal loss and change. His father died when he was just 9 years old, a pivotal moment that forced him to confront mortality and responsibility at an age when most boys remained shielded. He was sent to live with Jongintaba Dalindyebo, the acting regent of the Tembu people, a man who provided both mentorship and exposure to governance. Under Jongintaba's guidance, Mandela observed leadership in practice, its burdens, its ethics, and its strategic necessities, lessons that would later prove vital in his political life. In these formative years, Mandela also began to cultivate a sense of justice. He witnessed the unfair treatment of his people under apartheid's precursors, observing how laws and customs systematically restricted land ownership, education, and basic freedoms. The injustices were not abstract, they were immediate and visible. The displacement of families, restrictions on movement, and the humiliation imposed by those wielding colonial authority. Even as a young boy, Mandela internalized a sense of responsibility, that to live ethically, one could not remain silent in the face of oppression. Sport and culture shaped him as well. Mandela was an accomplished athlete, particularly skilled in boxing and running, disciplines that instilled resilience, strategic thinking, and endurance. He learned to confront challenges directly, to persevere despite exhaustion, and to respect discipline, all traits that would later sustain him through decades of struggle. Music, dance, and the oral traditions of his community deepened his appreciation for identity, belonging, and the power of collective memory. Mandela's early life was a careful balancing act. absorbing European education while remaining deeply rooted in African culture, understanding authority while questioning injustice, and cultivating intellect alongside moral sensibility. By the time he reached adulthood, Mandela had become fluent in both worlds, the traditional Tembu society and the colonial-dominated South African system. He understood that leadership required negotiation across these divides, that influence depended not merely on position, but on respect, vision, and ethical grounding. Mandela's early exposure to both injustice and education forged a unique perspective, a blend of empathy, courage, and strategic insight that would later underpin his approach to activism and reconciliation. The young Mandela was ambitious yet humble. He dreamed of entering law, a profession through which he could confront systemic injustice directly. In 1939, he enrolled at the University College of Fort Hare, the elite institution for Black South Africans. There, Mandela encountered intellectual rigor, political debate, and a broader understanding of colonial structures. Fort Hare was a crucible of leadership, producing many figures who would later challenge apartheid. Mandela engaged with peers, debated ideas, and learned to navigate institutional politics, developing both the intellectual tools and social networks that would shape his future activism. Yet even in these early years, Mandela's nature was tested. Conflicts arose between personal ambition and collective responsibility. He became involved in student protests, demonstrating that even in controlled environments, he could not accept injustice or the suppression of voices. His involvement led to confrontation with authorities and eventual suspension, a formative experience that illustrated both the risks and the moral imperatives of dissent. Mandela learned that principled action often carried personal cost, a lesson he would carry throughout his life. These years were also the genesis of Mandela's understanding of negotiation, patience, and strategy. Observing the delicate power dynamics between students, faculty, and colonial administrators, he realized that lasting change required not only moral conviction, but also calculated engagement. He saw that rebellion without strategy could be destructive, while carefully directed action could reshape societies. This understanding would later manifest in the long, disciplined struggle against apartheid, a campaign that combined activism, diplomacy, and moral leadership into a coherent, sustainable approach. At the end of his time at Fort Hare, Mandela had begun to recognize his own voice as a tool for transformation. He learned that persuasion, clarity of thought, and ethical reasoning could challenge entrenched power structures. He also internalized a profound commitment to his people, understanding that personal ambition without collective purpose was hollow. Mandela's formative years had forged a man capable of envisioning a society rooted in justice, dignity, and equality, while remaining pragmatic in approach, disciplined in action, and resilient in spirit. Thus, the foundation of Nelson Mandela's life was laid, a synthesis of heritage, education, personal loss, moral awakening, and intellectual rigor. He was a young man who understood the weight of history, the persistence of injustice, and the necessity of courage. The rolling hills of the Eastern Cape, the stories of elders, the debates of Fort Hare, and the lessons of mentorship had all combined to create a figure who would not only challenge the most entrenched system of racial oppression the world had seen, but would also emerge as a symbol of reconciliation, resilience, and the enduring power of principled leadership. Even in these early years, Mandela's trajectory was clear. He would be a man defined by action, guided by conscience, and committed to the liberation of his people. Every story he heard, every injustice he witnessed, every lesson he absorbed was a seed planted for the future struggle. His path was not yet defined in detail, but the moral compass, intellectual discipline, and unyielding courage were already present, awaiting the moment when the storm of apartheid would demand the fullness of his vision and the totality of his resolve.
After leaving Fort Hare, Nelson Mandela moved to Johannesburg, the pulsating heart of South Africa's industrial and political life. The city, teeming with miners, merchants, and migrants from across the region, presented a stark contrast to the rolling hills of the Eastern Cape. It was a place where opportunity and oppression collided, where laborers toiled in mines under brutal conditions, where Black South Africans were segregated, restricted, and systematically marginalized by laws crafted to maintain white supremacy. Mandela, a young man of intellect and ambition, quickly grasped the structural inequalities that defined the city. Johannesburg's crowded streets, its simmering resentment, and its underground networks of resistance became both his education and his crucible. Mandela sought to understand the mechanisms of law and governance that perpetuated oppression. He enrolled at the University of Witwatersrand to study law, one of the few Black South Africans in an institution dominated by white privilege. Here, he encountered systemic racism in its most subtle and overt forms. Professors dismissive of his questions, textbooks written for white audiences, and bureaucracies designed to enforce exclusion. Yet Mandela did not retreat. He excelled in debate, cultivated critical thinking, and began to understand law as both a tool of oppression and a potential instrument of liberation. It was in these years that the intersection of intellect, strategy, and moral courage, already evident in his youth, was honed into a weapon for justice. At the same time, Mandela immersed himself in political activism. He joined the African National Congress, or ANC, in 1943, aligning with an organization that sought to confront systemic injustice through organized resistance. Initially, the ANC had relied on petitions, negotiations, and appeals to conscience, methods Mandela respected, but soon recognized as insufficient against an entrenched, violent regime. The introduction of the Youth League within the ANC allowed him to advocate for more direct action, urging campaigns of civil disobedience, mass mobilization, and coordinated protest. Mandela's eloquence, strategic acumen, and moral authority quickly elevated him within the organization. He became a bridge between the ideals of liberation and the practical necessities of organized struggle. Mandela's early activism was marked by both courage and adaptability. He traveled extensively, meeting with leaders of labor unions, civic organizations, and underground networks, building alliances across ethnic and linguistic divisions. He understood that apartheid was not simply a legal system, but a deeply ingrained social order, reinforced by economic dependence, ideological indoctrination, and fear. To challenge it, Mandela knew that resistance had to be multifaceted: legal challenges in courts, mass mobilization in cities, and education to awaken political consciousness among the oppressed. Each action, each speech, each alliance was calculated to strengthen the capacity of the movement while maintaining moral legitimacy in the eyes of both domestic and international observers. The 1940s and 1950s brought intensifying confrontation with apartheid policies. Laws restricting movement, property ownership, and political participation crystallized the oppression Mandela had long observed. The 1948 election, which brought the National Party to power, codified apartheid into the legal framework of South Africa. For Mandela, the moment was both devastating and clarifying. The struggle could no longer rely solely on dialogue or petitions. It required organized resistance, personal sacrifice, and readiness for confrontation. Mandela's philosophy of resistance began to take shape. Influenced by figures such as Mahatma Gandhi, he embraced the principle of nonviolent protest, but recognized that the South African context, marked by entrenched violence, economic exploitation, and systemic repression, would demand flexibility. Mandela argued for the strategic use of civil disobedience, strikes, and protests, while simultaneously preparing cadres for potential armed resistance. He saw that liberation required both moral clarity and tactical precision, a duality that would define his leadership for decades. During this period, Mandela also became acutely aware of the personal costs of activism. Surveillance, intimidation, and harassment by state authorities were constant realities. Fellow activists were arrested, tortured, or exiled. Mandela himself faced threats and discrimination at nearly every turn, yet these dangers sharpened rather than diminished his resolve. He internalized the lesson that the struggle for justice often requires the willingness to endure personal suffering for the greater good, a principle that would guide him through decades of imprisonment and public service. Mandela's activism also involved extensive intellectual preparation. He studied history, political theory, and revolutionary movements across the globe, analyzing strategies for confronting oppression and understanding the dynamics of power. He corresponded with leaders of anti-colonial movements, read extensively on Marxism, socialism, and democratic principles, and synthesized these ideas into a framework suited to the unique South African context. Unlike many leaders, Mandela combined moral conviction with rigorous intellectual analysis, ensuring that his decisions were both principled and strategically sound. By the mid-1950s, Mandela had established himself as a formidable strategist, a persuasive orator, and a symbol of enduring courage. He navigated internal tensions within the ANC, balancing radical and moderate factions and fostering unity across diverse constituencies. His ability to combine vision with pragmatism, principle with strategy, and intellect with empathy positioned him to lead in the coming decades of escalating confrontation with apartheid. Mandela's early activism had transformed him from a young lawyer and student into a national leader, a figure whose moral authority and tactical skill would carry him through imprisonment, negotiation, and ultimately the presidency of a liberated South Africa.
By the early 1960s, Nelson Mandela had become a central figure in the struggle against apartheid, a man whose leadership and moral authority were widely recognized both in South Africa and abroad. The government, threatened by his growing influence and by the ANC's organized campaigns, intensified its repression. The state's apparatus of surveillance, intimidation, and arrest was relentless, and Mandela soon faced the gravest consequence: incarceration. In 1962, Mandela was arrested and tried for incitement and leaving the country illegally. Convicted, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. During this period, he endured the harsh realities of South Africa's correctional system. Yet even in confinement, Mandela's mind and spirit remained active. He continued to study, correspond with political allies, and strategize for the broader struggle against apartheid. Letters became both lifelines and tools of leadership, conveying instructions, encouragement, and philosophical reflection. Mandela's imprisonment was not only a personal trial, but a crucible in which his resilience, patience, and moral authority were further forged. The defining chapter of his incarceration began with the Rivonia trial. Alongside other ANC leaders, Mandela faced charges of sabotage, conspiracy, and attempting to overthrow the state. The courtroom became a stage upon which he articulated the ethical justification for resistance, framing the ANC's actions as a moral imperative in the face of systemic injustice. In his now famous statement from the dock, Mandela declared that he was prepared to die for his ideals, emphasizing that the struggle was not for personal gain, but for the freedom and dignity of his people. His words resonated far beyond the walls of the court, galvanizing domestic support and attracting international attention. Following the trial, Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964. He was sent to Robben Island, a penal colony in Table Bay, notorious for its harsh conditions. The island's isolation, hard labor, and dehumanizing treatment were designed to break spirits, yet Mandela endured with unyielding resolve. Prison life tested not only physical endurance, but also psychological fortitude. Mandela's days were regimented: long hours of forced labor, limited contact with the outside world, and strict oversight by guards. Yet he used every moment as an opportunity for growth, study, and leadership, transforming the prison into a school of resilience and strategy. Education became a central focus during his imprisonment. Mandela and fellow inmates engaged in rigorous intellectual exchange, discussing politics, history, philosophy, and strategy. They debated approaches to resistance, governance, and post-apartheid reconstruction, ensuring that the next generation of leaders would emerge prepared for the responsibilities of freedom. Mandela himself pursued studies in law through correspondence, refining his understanding of justice, rights, and institutional structures.
This intellectual discipline was inseparable from moral reflection, reinforcing his belief that liberation must be guided by both strategic acumen and ethical principle. Robben Island also became a space where Mandela honed the art of leadership under extreme conditions. He managed tensions among inmates, mediated disputes, and fostered solidarity despite the strains of confinement. By demonstrating fairness, empathy, and unyielding integrity, Mandela reinforced the idea that leadership is not defined by coercion, but by moral authority and the ability to inspire trust. His actions within the prison were a microcosm of the larger struggle, cultivating unity, resilience, and vision amid adversity. Isolation from the broader world posed both challenges and opportunities. Mandela grappled with loneliness, the longing for family, and the uncertainty of his future. Yet he transformed these limitations into a form of inner discipline, cultivating patience, reflection, and a long-term perspective. He recognized that the struggle against apartheid would not be resolved overnight, and that personal suffering could be meaningful if it advanced the cause of freedom. This philosophy of endurance became one of Mandela's defining characteristics, the ability to sustain hope, integrity, and strategic clarity even when circumstances seemed most bleak. Mandela's imprisonment also strengthened his understanding of reconciliation. Observing the fears, prejudices, and insecurities of both prisoners and guards, he began to conceive a vision of post-apartheid South Africa grounded in dialogue, forgiveness, and inclusion. He understood that liberation would not merely be the removal of oppressive laws, but the transformation of social consciousness, a society capable of embracing justice without succumbing to vengeance. This insight was not theoretical, it emerged from lived experience, from the daily negotiations, empathy, and moral discernment required to maintain dignity in the face of systemic cruelty. Communication with the outside world, though limited, became a critical tool. Mandela's letters, smuggled out through trusted channels, maintained coordination with ANC leadership and conveyed strategic guidance. These communications reflected both tactical awareness and the cultivation of hope. Instructions for resistance were paired with messages of moral purpose, reinforcing the commitment of activists who remained on the front lines. Mandela's ability to lead from confinement exemplified his extraordinary capacity to integrate strategy, ethics, and vision. The passage of decades in prison did not diminish Mandela's public stature, rather it elevated him to a symbol of enduring resistance. International attention, fueled by media coverage, advocacy campaigns, and solidarity movements, recognized him as the embodiment of the struggle against apartheid. His personal suffering became a lens through which the world could witness the injustices of South Africa's racial hierarchy. Mandela's imprisonment thus operated on multiple levels: as a personal trial, as a crucible of leadership, and as a catalyst for global awareness and support. Despite harsh conditions, Mandela retained moments of human connection and reflection. Relationships with fellow prisoners, correspondence with family, and occasional interactions with sympathetic guards underscored the importance of empathy, patience, and moral consistency. Mandela's demeanor, calm, principled, and resolute, transformed the prison environment, influencing both inmates and wardens. His ability to maintain humanity under extreme adversity reinforced the idea that true leadership is inseparable from character, ethical consistency, and the capacity to inspire trust. In these years, Mandela also reflected deeply on the nature of justice and freedom. He recognized that dismantling apartheid would require more than legal change. It would necessitate transforming minds and hearts, addressing systemic inequalities, and fostering a culture of mutual respect. This understanding informed his long-term approach. Even while advocating for strategic resistance, he maintained a commitment to non-retaliation and reconciliation, anticipating the delicate political negotiations that would define South Africa's transition decades later. Robben Island, far from the centers of power, became a laboratory of patience, strategy, and moral fortitude. Mandela's experiences there exemplify the broader lesson of his life: that enduring transformation requires steadfast commitment, ethical clarity, and the ability to inspire others even when immediate results are unseen. He emerged from these years not embittered, but strengthened, equipped with the vision, resilience, and moral authority to guide a nation through one of its most perilous periods. By the end of his imprisonment, Mandela had become both a national and global icon. The symbolism of his endurance, the coherence of his moral vision, and the strategic insight of his leadership inspired not only South Africans but the international community. Mandela's story demonstrated that imprisonment could be a crucible not merely of suffering but of transformation, forging a leader capable of guiding a nation through liberation, reconciliation, and renewal.
In February 1990, after 27 years of imprisonment, Nelson Mandela walked out of Victor Verster prison into the glare of the world's attention. The air was thick with anticipation, the streets of South Africa alive with a mixture of hope, tension, and the cautious optimism of a nation on the brink of transformation. Mandela's release was not merely the end of his confinement, it was a seismic shift in the trajectory of a country scarred by decades of apartheid. As he emerged, tall, composed, and dignified, the world recognized that he embodied the aspirations of millions, a symbol of perseverance, moral courage, and the unyielding quest for justice. The early days following his release were a delicate balancing act. Mandela understood that South Africa's transition from apartheid could easily descend into chaos. He faced the formidable challenge of negotiating with a government that had long wielded power through fear, while simultaneously reassuring a population that had endured systemic oppression, violence, and humiliation. Mandela's approach was defined by his signature blend of pragmatism, moral authority, and vision. He emphasized dialogue over confrontation, reconciliation over revenge, and unity over division, setting a tone that would guide the nation through its most perilous years. Mandela's negotiations with President W. de Klerk and other government officials were marked by patience, strategic insight, and moral clarity. He recognized that dismantling apartheid required both legal and social transformation. The transition demanded the negotiation of a new constitution, the establishment of democratic institutions, and guarantees for minority rights, all while addressing the economic disparities and deep-seated mistrust that decades of oppression had entrenched. Mandela's leadership during these negotiations revealed his profound understanding of human psychology, the necessity of compromise, and the ability to maintain ethical integrity without sacrificing political effectiveness. The 1994 elections marked a historic moment, South Africa's first fully representative democratic election. Mandela, elected as the country's first black president, assumed office with a mandate both symbolic and practical. He faced monumental challenges, fostering national unity, addressing economic inequality, integrating formerly hostile communities, and establishing a functional, accountable government. Yet Mandela approached these tasks with the same disciplined determination, moral clarity, and strategic insight that had defined his life in activism and imprisonment. Central to Mandela's presidency was the philosophy of reconciliation. He understood that South Africa could not progress if it remained trapped in cycles of revenge and resentment. He reached out to former adversaries, including those within the National Party, building bridges between communities long divided by fear and hatred. Mandela emphasized shared citizenship, national pride, and the creation of institutions that would guarantee rights for all South Africans, regardless of race. His approach reflected both ethical vision and political pragmatism, the cultivation of trust, dialogue, and common purpose as essential instruments of nation building. One of the most iconic initiatives of Mandela's presidency was the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The TRC was designed to confront the atrocities of apartheid, providing a platform for victims to tell their stories, while offering perpetrators the opportunity for amnesty if they fully confessed their crimes. Mandela understood that reconciliation was not merely a symbolic act, it was a practical strategy for social cohesion, healing, and the prevention of future conflict. The TRC became a model for transitional justice worldwide, reflecting Mandela's capacity to transform ethical principles into actionable policy. Mandela's leadership extended beyond politics into culture, sport, and symbolism. He recognized the power of shared experiences and national pride to unify a fractured society.
The 1995 Rugby World Cup, hosted in South Africa, provided a vivid example. Rugby had long been associated with white South African identity, yet Mandela leveraged the event as a platform for national unity. Wearing the Springbok jersey and publicly supporting the team, he transformed a symbol of division into one of reconciliation, inspiring both black and white South Africans to embrace a shared future. This combination of strategic foresight, symbolic action, and ethical clarity exemplified Mandela's approach. Leadership that operates simultaneously on practical, moral, and emotional levels. Economic and social policy during Mandela's presidency reflected a balance of ambition and pragmatism. He sought to address the inequalities entrenched by apartheid, emphasizing education, healthcare, housing, and job creation, while managing the delicate realities of a transitioning economy. Mandela was not an ideologue blind to constraint. He understood that stability, investment, and pragmatic governance were necessary to sustain the moral and political gains of liberation. His policies reflected a nuanced understanding that social justice requires both visionary ideals and practical implementation. Mandela's presidency was also marked by his consistent advocacy for human rights beyond South Africa's borders. He engaged in diplomacy across Africa and globally, supporting movements for justice, mediating conflicts, and lending his moral authority to causes of liberation, peace, and equality. Mandela's international stature reflected the universal resonance of his struggle, a man whose life embodied the principles of resilience, integrity, and ethical leadership in the face of systemic oppression. Even in the exercise of executive power, Mandela maintained humility and accessibility. He cultivated a leadership style based on listening, consensus building, and personal example. Ministers, civil servants, and citizens witnessed a president who valued dialogue over edict, empathy over authoritarianism, and principle over expediency. Mandela's personal comportment reinforced his political philosophy, the inseparability of character, ethics, and governance in the creation of a just society. Mandela also faced personal challenges during his presidency. He navigated tensions within the ANC, managed rival political factions, and addressed public skepticism about reconciliation initiatives. Each challenge demanded the application of patience, strategic negotiation, and moral courage. Mandela's ability to sustain focus, maintain ethical clarity, and inspire trust under pressure was a testament to the discipline and resilience cultivated over decades of struggle and imprisonment. By the end of his term, in 1999, Mandela had overseen a profound transformation. South Africa had transitioned from a state of legalized racial oppression to a democracy grounded in human rights and equality. Institutions of governance had been reformed, international relations strengthened, and social cohesion fostered, albeit imperfectly. Mandela's presidency was not without flaws. Challenges of poverty, inequality, and crime remained, but his leadership established the foundations for a more just, inclusive society. Mandela's tenure also demonstrated the enduring power of symbolic leadership. Through gestures of humility, inclusivity, and reconciliation, he shaped national identity, fostering a culture in which the principles of justice, equality, and shared citizenship were internalized across communities. The presidency became not only a political office, but a moral instrument, demonstrating that ethical leadership can affect both structural and cultural transformation. In these years, Mandela solidified his role as a global figure of inspiration. His life became a testament to the capacity of the human spirit to endure, to lead, and to reconcile. He showed that leadership is not defined solely by power, wealth, or coercion, but by the ability to transform adversity into opportunity, to unite disparate communities, and to translate moral conviction into actionable policy. Nelson Mandela's later years were marked by reflection, humanitarian engagement, and the consolidation of a legacy that transcended the boundaries of politics and geography. Having stepped down from the presidency in 1999, he could have retreated into the quietude of retirement, but Mandela remained committed to the principles that had guided him throughout his life: justice, reconciliation, and service to humanity. His public presence, though less politically charged, continued to inspire, educate, and guide both South Africans and the global community. Even in retirement, Mandela's influence was profound. He traveled extensively, meeting with world leaders, engaging with civil society, and lending his moral authority to causes of peace, human rights, and development. Mandela recognized that his life struggle was not solely for the liberation of South Africa, but part of a broader human endeavor, the promotion of dignity, equality, and justice for all. His interventions often emphasized dialogue, compromise, and ethical leadership, reinforcing the lessons that had defined both his imprisonment and presidency. Mandela also focused on domestic challenges, addressing persistent inequality, poverty, and the lingering scars of apartheid. Through the Nelson Mandela Foundation established in 1999, he promoted education, social justice initiatives, and dialogue around human rights. The foundation's work reflected his enduring belief that societal transformation requires both structural reform and moral consciousness, empowering individuals, fostering critical thinking, and nurturing a culture of empathy and accountability. Mandela's post-presidential initiatives demonstrated his understanding that true leadership extends beyond office, requiring sustained engagement with the moral and material conditions of society. Throughout these years, Mandela maintained a remarkable personal discipline, balancing public obligations with private reflection. He valued family, friendship, and the contemplative practices that had sustained him through decades of struggle. The rhythms of daily life, reading, reflection, correspondence, were interwoven with public duties, creating a life that was both active and contemplative, committed to principle, yet attuned to human frailty. Mandela's personal integrity, humility, and accessibility reinforced the enduring power of his example, that character and morality remain central to effective and inspiring leadership. Mandela's later years were also marked by symbolic acts that reinforced national unity and reconciliation. He celebrated milestones with former adversaries, publicly acknowledged the contributions of diverse communities, and participated in ceremonies that highlighted the shared history of a nation striving to transcend division. Mandela understood the power of symbolism, the ability of gestures, ceremonies, and public rituals to shape collective consciousness, foster empathy, and consolidate social cohesion. His presence at these events was not performative alone. It carried ethical weight, signaling the principles of forgiveness, justice, and collective responsibility. In 2008, Mandela celebrated his 90th birthday, an occasion that drew dignitaries, activists, and citizens from around the world. The celebrations were not merely a commemoration of age, but a recognition of a life devoted to the service of others, a testament to the transformative power of resilience, moral courage, and visionary leadership. Mandela's biography by this time had become both historical record and moral exemplar, chronicling the struggle against apartheid, the endurance of imprisonment, and the triumph of reconciliation and governance rooted in principle. As Mandela aged, his health became a central concern, yet even frailty did not diminish his influence. He continued to advocate for causes such as HIV/AIDS awareness, global peace initiatives, and education, demonstrating that moral authority and practical impact are not constrained by physical limitation. Mandela's engagement illustrated a lifelong commitment to principles over self-interest, showing that leadership is a sustained ethical endeavor rather than a temporary position of power. Mandela's death on December 5, 2013, marked the end of a life that had spanned nearly a century of human struggle, achievement, and moral advancement. The global outpouring of grief and admiration reflected the profound resonance of his life's work. Millions mourned not only the man, but the ideals he embodied. Across South Africa, cities and villages observed moments of silence, gatherings, and commemorative acts. Internationally, leaders from every continent recognized Mandela as a figure whose moral authority and vision had transcended borders, inspiring generations to confront injustice and cultivate reconciliation. The legacy of Nelson Mandela is multifaceted. He transformed a nation, dismantling an oppressive legal and social system, and establishing a democratic state grounded in equality and human rights. Yet his influence extends beyond institutional reform. Mandela demonstrated the capacity for human beings to endure injustice without succumbing to hatred, to lead without domination, and to reconcile without compromise of principle. His life illustrates that ethical leadership, strategic foresight, and moral courage can coalesce to transform societies, offering a model for leaders and citizens alike. Mandela's philosophy of reconciliation remains particularly instructive. In a world frequently divided by ethnicity, religion, ideology, and history, he demonstrated that sustainable peace requires empathy, understanding, and the deliberate cultivation of trust. By forgiving those who had wronged him personally and politically, Mandela illustrated that justice and mercy need not be mutually exclusive, and that societal transformation depends on the moral imagination as much as on legislation or force. His approach reshaped South Africa's national identity, fostering a culture of shared citizenship, collective responsibility, and ethical engagement. Education and empowerment were central to Mandela's enduring mission. He believed that knowledge is a foundation for freedom, that critical thinking and moral awareness are indispensable for a just society. Through the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Mandela promoted educational initiatives that equipped young South Africans to navigate a complex post-apartheid world. He recognized that liberation is not a moment but a process, a continuum requiring investment in human potential, cultivation of civic responsibility, and the nurturing of ethical consciousness across generations. Mandela's life also reshaped the global understanding of leadership. His ability to combine vision, moral authority, and strategic acumen offers enduring lessons: that power is most effective when exercised with humility, that influence is sustained through integrity and empathy, and that the true measure of leadership is the capacity to unite, heal, and inspire. From his youth in the Eastern Cape, through decades of activism and imprisonment, to his presidency and post-presidential engagement, Mandela exemplified a rare alignment of principle, intellect, and action. Even beyond the political and moral spheres, Mandela became a symbol of resilience, dignity, and the human capacity for transformation. Artists, writers, educators, and citizens have drawn inspiration from his story, creating a cultural legacy that reinforces the universal relevance of his life. His speeches, letters, and recorded reflections continue to serve as educational and moral touchstones, reminding the world that justice is attainable, not through force alone, but through courage, perseverance, and ethical leadership. Mandela's final years were a testament to the enduring human spirit. Though his health declined, he remained engaged, dignified, and conscious of his symbolic role in guiding society towards justice and equality. His life story, from rural boyhood to global statesman, embodies the profound potential of moral courage combined with strategic action. Mandela's legacy is not confined to history books. It lives in the institutions he helped build, the principles he exemplified, and the millions he inspired to pursue justice with patience, resilience, and empathy. In death, Mandela became both a national and universal figure, a reminder that ethical leadership, grounded in principle and exercised with courage, can reshape not only a nation, but also the moral imagination of the world. His life demonstrates that oppression can be confronted without hatred, that unity can be forged from division, and that the endurance of principle over decades can produce transformative outcomes. Mandela's story is at once deeply South African and profoundly human, a narrative of struggle, sacrifice, vision, and reconciliation that resonates across time and geography. Nelson Mandela's legacy endures in the institutions of democracy, in the lives of those inspired by his moral example, and in the ongoing pursuit of justice worldwide. His life affirms the enduring truth that the human spirit, when guided by principle, courage, and empathy, can overcome the gravest challenges, heal the deepest wounds, and illumine the path toward freedom, equality, and human dignity.